people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Robertson versus Jocelyn Fernandez. Let's talk about the fight. This fight was a super flyweight contest for what was an IBF youth title. In that way, Taylor Robertson is one step closer to perhaps challenging this division's reigning IBF champion. A descent from Taylor Robertson from bantamweight down to super flyweight. A better weight, I think, for Taylor than bantamweight was.
It's what we saw in the Sarah Higginson fight.
That's what we saw more recently in the Jocelyn Fernandez fight. Taylor Robertson was just better all around, fighting out of the orthodox stance behind a shell guard.
Picking off Jocelyn Fernandez.
Was attempting to jab right hand her way into striking distance, but was getting picked off long distance from the longer, more athletic Taylor Robertson. Edge and speed, too. Better feet.
More coordinated.
Jocelyn Fernandez, noble effort. Got hit clean a lot.
I mean a lot.
This fight wasn't a hard fight to score. This story wasn't a hard story to tell. Taylor Robertson was just better all around than Jocelyn Fernandez.
Counter shots, backhands,
combinations. Taylor Robertson showed a little bit of everything in this fight.
Snapping Yasmin Fernandez's head back several times.
And this goes back to what I told you guys immediately after the Sarah Higginson fight. We're seeing a more spiteful Taylor Robertson at super flyweight, where perhaps she has a bigger punch than she did up there at bantamweight. We're seeing a more spiteful.
She's landing with more authority at this weight, and in that way, it's a better weight for her.
Seen images of Taylor Robertson next to America's own Zarina McCoy. We saw Taylor Robertson do an interview with Sky Nicholson ahead of this fight, just before it. You could see the size differential. You could see that Taylor Robertson really isn't a big woman.
For the time being, she's more adequately suited to campaign as a super flyweight than a bantamweight.
Very young, showing a lot of potential. Only 24 years old, exhibiting a high ceiling. She lands with more authority at super flyweight than she used to up there at bantamweight. This is the right weight at the right time in Taylor's career.
She's looking sharp.
Seeing more and more of Taylor Robertson's backhand, more aggression. She's sitting on her punches more. That delicate balance between...
The delicate balance of offense and defense and moving seamlessly between the two.
She's becoming a more complete fighter, and I like what I'm seeing. It's Jocelyn Fernandez fight, not a hard fight to score at all. Like I said, it's not a hard story to tell. Taylor Robertson was just better in every department, better at every turn, faster, stronger, and more effective. She is landing with more authority as a super flyweight.
You gotta be able to manage that, being the aggressor and being the defender.
The bane of the finesse fighting kind of fighter, the pure boxer, is they might spend so much time on the back foot, circling away from their opponent on the perimeter of the ring, that it might start to look like they're being outworked, like their back is being put on those ropes. Though at the same time, you don't want to be so front foot heavy that you're giving the other girl too many opportunities to hit you clean, too many opportunities to engage. You have to be able to balance that, and that's what Taylor Robertson's been doing fight by fight, that happy medium between being the aggressor and being the defender.
She's looking more like a boxer-puncher, a spiteful one.
Where some fights and some time ago, Taylor Robertson had the look of a pure boxer, hit and not get hit, completely defensively minded, staying on the move. She's now showing a little bit more spite, bit more aggression, and I like it. It will prove useful as she climbs up those ranks at 115 pounds and inexorably challenges for a world title. This being a IBF youth title fight, she's one step closer to challenging for the blue belt, the full
title.
Racking up a 10th round TKO stoppage over Jocelyn Fernandez, who has taken far too much punishment as the fight progressed. 3 and 4 punch combinations from Taylor Robertson. That tells the story.
She's now one step closer to fighting for the IBF title.
Against what is still this division's reigning unbeaten IBF champion of Argentina, Marcela Luján. There are actually 4 active reigning champions in today's super flyweight division. Juan Suarez of Mexico holding the WBC. Clara Lescurat, newly crowned WBA champion of Argentina. Tamao Ozawa of Japan, newly crowned WBO champion. And Marcela Luján of Argentina, reigning unbeaten IBF champion. It seems that Taylor Robertson is angling for a Musiela Lujan fight. This being an IBF youth title that she just won, brings her one step closer to facing Musiela for the full title. Taylor Robertson, who this past weekend advanced to a professional record of 6 wins, 1 loss, with 1 draw, and 2 recorded knockouts.
They don't want to miscalculate. They don't want to overshoot this thing.
Even if Taylor Robertson exhibits a higher ceiling than most other fighters campaigning at super flyweight, even if she has all the potential and all the makings of a champion here and now, you don't want to rush her into a title fight. You don't want to rush her into a Musiela Lujan fight when she's only 24 years old. She's got all the time in the world to rack up all the professional experience she needs. Ideally, you do that fight approximately 2 to 3 fights from now if Musiela Lujan still is this division's reigning IBF champion 2 to 3 fights from now. For now, they've got to get Taylor Robertson more rounds in the bank with more experienced fighters than Jocelyn Fernandez.
Congratulations to her for racking up another W.
We then come to the main event of that same card, the IBF Cruiserweight title fight between Breidis, the then champion, and Opetaia, unbeaten Opetaia, the challenger. And the fight went as I predicted. I expected that Opetaia, he might spell problems for Breidis' continued reign as this division's IBF Ring Magazine and lineal champion.
In the first 2 rounds, it was a bit hard to separate them. You could argue that Breidis took at least one of the first 2 rounds.
Perhaps he did, because in those first 2 rounds, it was hard to separate them, though it didn't take long for Opetaia to amass a considerable lead. I had Opetaia well ahead going into the 8th and 9th rounds.
He botched it up Breidis' nose pretty bad in the 4th, made it hard for that guy to breathe.
It was a competitive fight, very entertaining to watch, don't get me wrong. Opetaia had to work for every round that he banked, but I did have Opetaia well ahead after 9.
Noticeable speed advantage over the champion.
Managing the distance well, connecting with several eye-catching straight left hands. That being Opetaia's backhand, Jay being a southpaw, he jabs with the right to set up the left, and he connected that straight left hand on Breidis several times.
You know, I can't say that Breidis looked old.
Old to where he's just cannon fodder at this point for any guy with a pulse in the cruiserweight division. For the most part, he still looked formidable, still looked capable, and dangerous in spots. He got off several eye-catching right hands.
He still looks like he could be a handful for most other cruiserweights.
In this fight, he did look a step behind Opetaia. Opetaia looked considerably faster. His punches were a lot snappier. His movement seemed to...
made it hard for Breidis to get off his shots.
You never would have known it, but Opetaia was fighting with a broken jaw for most of this fight. Post-fight, it was stated that he broke his jaw in 2 places. He suffered the first break early on and the second one late, though it didn't start affecting him until well into the fight, late into the fight, in the championship rounds.
Was most noticeable in the last 2 rounds, rounds 11 and round 12.
Though for the most part, he bossed it throughout. Very dominant showing, amassing an early lead, cutting those southpaw angles, using that speed and athleticism of his that made it difficult for Breidis.
Made it hard for Breidis to get within striking distance to land his punches.
I want to say that Opetaia's best shots were his straight shots when he could get full extension on that arm, a couple of straight shots downstairs leading to some straight shots upstairs, moving and managing the distance.
Breidis seemed a little better on the inside than Jay did, though Jay did connect with that massive uppercut.
That was in the 4th round, and that was mid-range to inside. I think that was a defining punch when it comes to this fight. I think busting up Breidis' nose the way that he did with that uppercut mid-range to inside greatly affected the aesthetic of this fight and greatly affected Breidis.
Oh yeah, it affected his Breidis.
Trying to breathe out of that thing as Opetaia connected with straight left hand after straight left hand. Bloody grimace from the champion. You could see he felt the title slipping away. I had this thing about 7 rounds to 5 to 8 rounds to 4.
Saw a light surge from the champion, who was gaining strength as the fight progressed.
You can chalk that up to experience from the champion and a lack thereof from the challenger. Breidis was taking Opetaia into deep waters, seemed to have been fading down the stretch. Those last 2 rounds, scary rounds for the challenger, scary rounds for Opetaia. That broken jaw, it was finally starting to affect him. It was finally catching up to him. He couldn't even close his mouth.
Don't get me wrong, he showed a great chin, world-class chin, fighting through a broken jaw most of his fight.
But he's only human, and you saw Maris Breidis fighting with a sense of urgency in the last 4 or 5 rounds. Though for me, it was too little, too late. Opetaia had amassed an early lead, a considerable lead. I did give Maris Breidis those last 2 rounds, maybe one in the beginning and one more in the middle.
Looked like a 7-5 kind of fight for me.
7-5 to 8-4. The prediction stuck, and Opetaia, the unbeaten southpaw from Australia, was able to upset the apple cart for Maris Breidis.
And I didn't just pick him to win, I actually wanted Opetaia to win.
I'll be honest with you, for some weeks and some months now, I didn't like what I was seeing from the reigning IBF champion. I didn't like what I was seeing from Maris Breidis. He spent far too much time for me focusing on a YouTuber turned pugilist instead of trying to unify with his fellow champion at this weight, Lawrence Okolie. You got the sense
this guy didn't fancy that Lawrence Okolie fight. He wasn't keen on unifying. He was just biding his time.
When I saw that Maris Breidis was going to travel to Australia for this fight, I thought to myself, what'd get Maris Breidis more money? Taking on Opetaia in Australia or taking on Lawrence Okolie in the United Kingdom? Why is it that Maris Breidis is going all the way down there to defend his title against his IBF mandatory challenger, granted, but why is he doing that instead of unifying with Lawrence when Lawrence can get him more money? It's dicey. Because Opetaia was Maris Breidis' mandatory challenger, in that way he did have to fight him. Though if they wanted that Lawrence Okolie unification match, they could have seen about getting Jay to step aside and unifying with that guy. I see Maris Breidis travel to Australia for this Opetaia fight, and I tell myself, you know what? He probably likes his chances against Jay a lot more than he likes his chances against Lawrence. Couple that with the fact that the Sarlin brothers seem to have had plans to match Maris Breidis had he won against Sky Sports' own Richard Riakporhe.
They would have won that fight. Looks like they were going to go to Sky to match him against Richard.
And not to Matchroom to unify titles with Lawrence. More and more you got the sense that Maris Breidis, he doesn't fancy unifying titles anymore. He doesn't fancy that Lawrence Okolie fight.
And why would he? He's already participated in 2 seasons of the World Boxing Super Series. He's 37 years old.
You all know that Sky Sports is paying guys top dollar to come over to their side of things and do fights with their fighters, Richard Riakporhe being one among them. Seems to me that Maris Breidis was ready to cash out, and he was biding his time.
Opetaia winning the red belt changes things.
My knowledge, the Australian-born, Australian-based fighter has no formal connections or relationships with anybody in the UK, Sky Sports, or Boxer.
Well, Matchroom is expanding to Australia.
We know that Lawrence Okolie was made an offer by someone. Most speculate that it's Sky Sports trying to bring him and his WBO title over to their side of things. But with things having gone the way they've gone, Maris Breidis and Opetaia, Jay doesn't have any formal connection, any formal ties to Sky Sports. Perhaps Maris Breidis did by way of his promoters, Kale and Nisei Sarlin.
But Jay doesn't, not to my knowledge, and Jay is the newly crowned IBF champion.
Opetaia, who's likely going to be out for a while, he suffered 2 breaks to his jaw. It's going to take some time to recover. When he recovers, he'll likely have at least one hometown title defense before unification talks resume. And Eddie Hearn expanding to Australia, maybe he can offer that guy something. Maybe they can offer to do the fight there in Jay's neck of the woods, or they can fly him out to the United Kingdom. And maybe if Eddie Hearn can get Lawrence a unification match, Lawrence might stay on the Matchroom and his own side of things. At minimum, what I think is Maris Breidis losing that title, it does change things.
God only knows what's going on with this division's WBA champion, Arsene Goulamarian.
And I think getting this division's WBC champion, Lunga Makabu, Lunga being a Don King fighter, I think that could prove difficult. But Jay, perhaps working with Jay might be easier. Congratulations to him for a career-best performance and a career-defining win this weekend over Maris Breidis. We then come to the Queensbury Promotions BT Sport card, featured Joyce versus Christian Hammer as the main event. Fight didn't last very long. Nobody expected it to. I expected Joyce to roll over Christian Hammer. That's what he did in 4 rounds.
You believe that the last time this guy saw action before this fight was this same month last year?
That's right. Ahead of the Christian Hammer fight, the last time Joyce saw action was in July. of last year. Here he is again, returning to action in July of this year.
Another comeback.
Many of the things you come to expect from a Joe Joyce fight, that's what we saw. He gets hit a bit, perhaps too much.
Christian Hammer connected with some very eye-catching looping rights.
Eye-catching shots, and more than once, in a division where all it really takes is for one hard shot to put a guy down. Joe Joyce absorbed quite a few of those, perhaps too many for me. You get the sense that he can get away with that with a Christian Hammer. He can get away with that with the Christian Hammers and Carlos DeCombs and Bryant Jenningses of the world. He can do that, but as he steps up in class, those upper echelon guys, you let those guys land on you the same way that Christian Hammer just did.
Well, I don't call him the Juggernaut for nothing.
That is how he earned his reputation for being one of the most durable guys around. The amount of shots, the amount of punishment that he can take. Though that's only going to last so long. He's only human.
Barrels forward, drills Christian Hammer to the midsection, drills him to the body.
Stops him in the fourth round. You wonder that Joe Joyce perhaps shouldn't experiment with a cross guard as he's coming forward, similar to what we used to see from George Foreman upon his return to boxing, the second phase of his career.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of guys using a guard like that in this era.
Given Joe Joyce's base style, his characteristics as a fighter, his physical dimensions, and his durability, it might go a long way towards extending his boxing career if he didn't get hit so much.
Yeah.
So often.
Yeah.
Because he gets hit a lot. And I know. Christian Hammer, he ain't exactly got world-level power, but this is the heavyweight division, after all. The one division where you're always just one punch away from being put down and being put out. They're talking about getting Joe Joyce back out there in September.
All right.
Joe Joyce is currently in position to face the winner of Joshua versus Usyk 2. That's going down in August. Joe's supposed to be returning to action the following month in September. Who against? Your guess is as good as mine. But because he's in a pole position to challenge the winner of that fight by way of the WBO, because he's in a pole position to challenge the winner of Joshua versus Usyk 2, who are they going to match him against in September? Somebody that jeopardizes his title shot?
If we're just pulling names out of a hat, you can pretty much match Joe against anybody in September. Martin Bacoli?
Yeah, if we're just pulling names out of a hat with no consideration for Joe's current position in the WBO's ranked standings. He is in a pole position to challenge the winner of Joshua versus Usyk, but you put him in there with Martin Bacoli, well, that jeopardizes that title shot for him, doesn't it?
Martin Bacoli's coming off a career-best win against Tony Yoka. Olympic gold medalist of France, Tony Yoka.
He beat the fucking shit out of that guy. And I wouldn't mind seeing that same Martin Bacoli take on Joe Joyce, so you have to consider that whoever they match Joe against in September,
They might decide to play it safe because he's very close to fighting for an alphabet title.
so maybe they don't match him against somebody as inspired with as much power as a Martin Bacoli, who's coming off a career best win. Maybe they get him a guy that's flying a bit low on the radar, like Agit Kabayel. He's an unbeaten guy, can move, can box.
He can.
Not much of a puncher, though.
Yeah, Joe's not under much threat of being knocked out by that guy. He's not a big puncher.
I remember in late 2020 when Tyson Fury was playing with the idea of having a comeback fight in between his second fight with Deontay Wilder and what inexorably became the third. I remember that the name of Agit Kabayel was being thrown around as a potential opponent option for Tyson Fury. So at minimum, you know that Frank is aware of this guy. Maybe he gets that guy to fight Joe in September. In any event, Joe Joyce advances to a professional record of 14 wins, no losses, no draws, banking his 13th pro knockout.